The Earth still holds valleys so remote that almost no one has set foot in them. Hidden behind mountains and glaciers, these places practically remain untouched and largely unknown to science. Here's 20 remote valleys that no one's explored, the last true frontiers of our planet. Number 20. The Sangpo Gorge in Tibet. In the eastern Himalayas of Tibet, the Yarlong Sangpo Gorge is often referred to as the world's deepest canyon, deeper even than the Grand Canyon. It was carved by the Yarlong Sangpo River, which later becomes the Brahmaputra in India. The gorge plunges more than 5,000 meters down. For much of the 20th century, even basic mapping of this region was limited. Until the late 1990s, few outsiders had even successfully made a full journey through the gorge. The area's combination of high-altitude cold and subtropical heat produces sudden storms and fog. Several expeditions have attempted to explore the gorge, including a 2002 National Geographic team that documented and confirmed the depth. Despite these efforts, though, the lower reaches of the gorge are largely unmapped in detail. There's still no permanent human settlement in the central section, and large parts are accessible only by a multi-week trek. Satellite imagery shows steep ravines that branch off the main canyon that have likely never been entered on foot. Even today, the Chinese government restricts access to much of the surrounding region, citing safety and preservation concerns. But what lies within the deepest tributaries, whether unknown species or hidden waterfalls, remains uncertain. But what is clear is that this valley is one of the last great unexplored natural corridors on Earth. Number 19. The Foja Mountain Valleys in Indonesia. The Foja Mountain Valleys in Indonesia, they rise up from one of the least disturbed rainforest systems left on the planet. The valleys cutting through these mountains are so remote that scientists didn't begin any major biological survey there until 2005. These valleys are surrounded by dense jungle and sharp ridges with constant rain, making access extremely difficult. When a joint expedition led by Conservation International and the Indonesian Institute of Sciences reached it in 2005, it required helicopter drops into the interior. The team described the area as a lost world, not because of any mystery or myth, but because it remained almost entirely untouched by humans. During the 05 and 07 expeditions, scientists documented dozens of previously undescribed species, including a long-nosed frog, a new species of honeybird eater, and several mammals that had never been photographed. Even local communities who live in the lowland areas rarely enter these high valleys due to their isolation and lack of resources. The ecosystem there has persisted without human disturbance for thousands of years. Researchers believe that each separate valley may host unique forms of life, but confirming this would require extensive fieldwork in the near impenetrable conditions. The remoteness of this region makes it vulnerable to illegal logging and mining if restrictions weaken. For now, though, most of the valleys remain unvisited by humans, real tangible places that modern science has only glimpsed from the air. Well, I guess it's a reminder that in the 21st century, even with satellites and drones, the Earth still has pockets of wilderness so remote, no one's ever set foot in them. Number 18. The Kaende Highlands. Located in the Enga province of Papua New Guinea, the Kaende Highlands contain some of the most isolated valleys in the Pacific. Standing about 2,000 to 3,000 meters above sea level, these highlands form a maze of valleys cut by rivers that feed into the Sepik and Fly systems. Because there's no major roads and few villages beyond the outer slopes, many of the inner valleys remain unvisited. Fieldwork in the 2000s had researchers record hundreds of plants and animal species, including dozens new to science. The valleys beyond main study zones are difficult to reach. Dense forests, boggy ground, and frequent cloud cover make navigation challenging. Helicopter surveys have shown that large portions of the range consist of limestone escarpments, which enclose these hidden basins, many with no visible trails or signs of habitation. Even the local tribes tend to live along the outer slopes and rarely venture into the deep valleys, except for occasional hunting. As a result, researchers believe that entire networks of streams and glacial lakes remain unexplored. Satellite imagery confirms the existence of huge green basins surrounded by cloud-shrouded ridges, but until proper surveys can be conducted, the deeper Kaende valleys will remain among the least studied on the planet. Number 17. Star Mountains Valleys. Running the border between Indonesia's Papua province and Papua New Guinea, the Star Mountains are part of the central Cordillera that runs the length of New Guinea. Within this range are some of the most inaccessible valleys in the world, cut by rivers such as the Fly, Strickland, and Oktedi. These valleys are so deep and forested that much of the terrain is uncharted even today. Now, the remoteness here is not an exaggeration. The mountains can only be reached by helicopter or several days of hiking through dense rainforest. All the heavy rainfall and karst formations creates an environment of collapsed sinkholes and narrow gorges that are almost impossible to travel through. Even geology teams exploring for copper and gold in the 1960s and 70s were unable to map the full extent of the valleys, despite aerial photography. In 2013, a small scientific team reported sightings of a rare tree kangaroo and several unidentified bird species. Yet the majority of the surrounding valleys are hidden beneath constant cloud and vegetation, and they remain untouched. Security restrictions on both sides of the border have limited research activity, so satellite data indicates the presence of drainage systems and isolated plateaus within the mountains, but few, if any, have been explored on foot. As with other regions of New Guinea, Star Mountain valleys are significant for what they represent, a final stronghold of wilderness where the modern world's scientific instruments have barely begun to penetrate. Number 16. The Paroo River Valley in Western Australia. In the interior of Western Australia, the Paroo River Valley is one of the least visited drainage basins on the continent. It's the last unregulated river in the entire Murray-Darling Basin, flowing freely through an environment of salt lakes, clay pans, and low rocky ridges. Because water here only appears periodically, the valley supports an unusual mix of ecosystems that depend on the timing and extent of floods. After major rain, the channel fills and wetlands bloom with bird life, including pelicans, herons, and rare species. When dry, the same landscape turns into an almost impassable stretch of cracked clay and salt-encrusted flats. For this reason, few scientific teams have ventured into the lower Peru during active flood stages, and the logistics of long-term study are pretty hard. There are indications of ancient stream paths and dune systems buried under layers of silt, suggesting a long history of fluctuating climate, yet because the erosion is far from any major highway or population center, little research has been carried out beyond the occasional survey. The local peoples here have known the Peru's rhythms for generations, following its cycles for food and ceremony. However, even they tend not to travel the entire length of the valley because much of it remains physically inaccessible. In an era when most of Australia's waterways have been extensively studied, the Paroo River Valley stands out as an intact, unexplored natural system. It's big, inhospitable, and still holds secrets beneath the salt crusts. Number 15. Verkhoyansk Range Valleys of northeastern Siberia, Russia. In one of the coldest places on Earth are a series of valleys that few people have ever entered. The Verkhoyansk Range in northeastern Siberia, part of the Sakha Republic. It goes for more than 1,000 kilometers across a frozen wilderness. While the town of Verkhoyansk is famous for recording some of the lowest temperatures in the northern hemisphere, these remote valleys deeper within the range are largely unvisited. Rivers like the Aditya and Yana cut through sedimentary rock layers, creating long troughs flanked by cliffs of frozen soil and ice wedges. Temperatures here can fall below -60 degrees Celsius in the winter, and even summer days rarely rise above 10 degrees Celsius. And despite being visible in satellites, many of the valleys here have never been explored on the ground. Yakutia is larger than most countries, yet roads cover only a tiny fraction. The valleys here are hundreds of kilometers away from any permanent settlement, and the only practical access is by helicopter or river raft during the short Arctic summer. Biologically, the area is part of the Siberian taiga and tundra transition zone. Scientists suspect microclimates here inside the deeper valleys could support rare cold-adapted plant species, but confirmation is lacking. The remoteness of the terrain, combined with frequent fog and sub-zero temperatures, has left it one of the least studied cold ecosystems on Earth. Geologists are interested in the region, of course, because permafrost cores here may contain ancient ice layers dating back tens of thousands of years. However, extracting those cores would require multi-week expeditions through terrain without established landing sites, fuel depots, or reliable communication. The logistical cost and the risk have made such missions rare. Even the local herders here and hunters avoid the inner valleys. Blizzards can strike without warning, and magnetic storms near the Arctic Circle can interfere with your navigation equipment. In the winter, darkness lasts up to 20 hours a day, while in the summer, constant daylight and swarms of insects make travel nearly impossible. Number 14. The Nyangani Highland Valleys, eastern Zimbabwe. Mount Nyangani, the highest point in Zimbabwe at 2,592 meters, rises above the national park near the Mozambique border. Deep within the eastern escarpment, these valleys are heavily forested, steep, and subject to near constant fog. Some areas have not been properly surveyed due to the vegetation, the unpredictable weather, and any limited road access. The region is part of the Eastern Highlands, which contains rare montane forests and grasslands that form an island distinct from drier lowlands to the west, and small streams plunge through the narrow ravines feeding rivers that descend towards the Indian Ocean. However, many of these habitats are poorly studied. Field researchers from Zimbabwe's Parks and Wildlife Authority have noted that some valleys below Mount Nyangani have never been systematically sampled. Local Shona communities regard parts of the mountain and its valleys as sacred and avoid entering them unnecessarily, and this cultural respect, combined with the challenges of the land, has kept much of the terrain in a pristine state. Even satellite imagery struggles to penetrate the cloud cover that hangs over the range most days of the year. Researchers believe that several small valleys within the national park still lack any detailed topographic data, so the terrain is prone to landslides and paths become impassable during the rainy season. The lack of any roads, combined with conservation policies limiting disturbance, means that the inner valleys are among the least explored areas in southern Africa. This is an environment where nature continues to thrive, much as it has for millennia. Number 13. The Languru Valleys, West Papua, Indonesia. On the western half of New Guinea lies Languru, a huge region in Indonesia's West Papua province that remains one of the least explored landscapes. Many of these valleys are enclosed by cliffs hundreds of meters high, and they're accessible only by helicopter or with days of climbing through a dense rainforest. The French-Indonesian Languru 2014 expedition, organized by the French Research Institute for Development, was among the few scientific efforts to penetrate the area. Researchers here discovered dozens of previously unknown species of fish, reptiles, and plants. The expedition's report showed that many of Languru's internal valleys and caves remain unexplored due to the sheer complexity of the terrain. The team described it as a labyrinth of rock where GPS signals fade and no continuous paths exist. Because the limestone areas are nearly impassable, researchers believe that species have evolved independently in each valley over thousands of years. Many sections are invisible from the air, hidden under a canopy and mist, making even remote sensing difficult. While conservationists have proposed expanding protected status for this place, the remoteness here already acts as a natural barrier against any exploitation. No commercial logging or mining currently operates inside the core region, and given its isolation, it represents one of the last true scientific frontiers in tropical biology. For now, much of it remains for what it has been for millennia, an enormous, silent wilderness, real, but largely unseen. Number 12. The Dbang Valley in India. In India's far northeast, near the border with Tibet, the Dbang Valley is among the most isolated and least disturbed regions in the eastern Himalayas. It covers more than 9,000 square kilometers of mountains, rivers, and deep forest, and although it contains small villages inhabited by the Indumishmi people, huge portions of the upper and inner valleys remain inaccessible and effectively unexplored. Because the terrain changes so drastically in elevation here, it creates a remarkable variety of ecosystems, from high alpine meadows to thick lowland jungle. This diversity supports rare species like the red panda, the Mishmi taken, the cloud leopard, and several orchids and rhododendrons found nowhere else in India. Expeditions have been limited by poor infrastructure and frequent landslides that block access. The region's heavy rain, among the highest in India, further complicates any exploration. Satellite data shows entire tributary valleys above the main settlements that have no recorded human trails or habitation. In recent years, though, conservation scientists and the Zoological Survey of India have made short forays into the accessible areas of the lower valley, and they've identified new amphibian and insect species. Even mapping efforts face challenges here, as the cloud cover often obscures the imagery for weeks at a time. The Indian government has proposed a hydroelectric project in parts of the valley, but opposition from local communities and environmental groups has delayed any development. For now, the Upper Dbang remains a wilderness. It's shaped by monsoon, rock, and snow, where nature dominates, and many tributary valleys have yet to see a single scientific visitor. Number 11. Cordillera Delcondor Valleys, Ecuador-Peru border. The Cordillera Delcondor, straddling the border between Ecuador and Peru, is a mountain chain in the upper Amazon basin. Its valleys are cut into sandstone plateaus that are surrounded by dense rainforests. For decades, this region was virtually closed to exploration due to ongoing border disputes between the two countries, and even today, large parts of it remain largely uncharted. In 2009, joint Ecuadorian and Peruvian scientific expeditions organized a peace agreement between the nations, discovered numerous previously unknown plant species in just a few weeks of fieldwork. However, these studies were confined to a few plateaus. Many of the valleys deeper in the interior have never been entered by researchers. The Cordillera receives near-constant rainfall, and the cliffs here are prone to collapse, so the combination of steep ravines, slippery ground, and thick vegetation makes travel slow and dangerous. Even indigenous groups who live in the lower forest rarely venture into the upper valleys except for hunting. Aerial imagery reveals narrow, linear depressions that extend deep into the plateau, potentially entire valley systems with their own streams and habitats down there. They've never been mapped in detail or studied on the ground, and scientists believe these isolated valleys may have species adapted to high humidity and acidic soils unique to this region. Ongoing concerns about illegal mining and access restrictions continue to limit fieldwork here, and as a result, the Cordillera Delcondor's valleys are among the last significant unexplored enclaves in the northern Amazon, existing largely outside human reach and even scientific understanding. Number 10. The Putoana Plateau valleys in Siberia. In the far north of central Siberia, the Putoana Plateau is a volcanic formation covering over 250,000 square kilometers. The valleys, canyons, and fjord-like lakes here all sit within the Arctic Circle, and it's so difficult to reach that most of it has never been explored on foot. The plateau is part of Russia's Krasnoyarsk Krai region. It's accessible only by helicopter or a really long river journey. Over millions of years, glacier and river erosion have carved these cliffs into huge valleys and gorges. Some descend more than 1,000 meters, and many of them remain unmapped at fine scale because the landscape is just immense. It's rugged, it's often hidden under cloud or snow for much of the year. In 2010, the area was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site for its untouched ecosystems and its rare wildlife, including reindeer, wolverines, and snow owls. Yet even UNESCO's surveys acknowledged that significant portions of the plateau's interior valleys had never been visited by scientists. The combination of climate, infrastructure, and seasonal flooding makes sustained exploration nearly impossible. Even aerial mapping missions face difficulty due to magnetic interference up there near the pole and unpredictable weather. Because of its remoteness, the Putoana Plateau's valleys are some of the least disturbed on Earth. To this day, many of its inner canyons have never been seen in person, only glimpsed with satellite images, showing an endless network of dark shadowed valleys beneath the Arctic clouds. Number 9. McKay Massif Valleys of Madagascar. In southwestern Madagascar, the McKay Massif is a huge network of sandstone ridges and narrow valleys that's one of the most inaccessible places on the island. Unlike the more famous rainforests in the east, the McKay lies in a dry region surrounded by semi-desert. The interior valleys are deep, humid, and almost completely isolated from the surrounding terrain, and it creates a kind of natural refuge for unique plant and animal species. It first gained global attention in 2007 when a French explorer led one of the first major scientific expeditions into this area. This team discovered multiple previously unknown species like fish, frogs, and plants, and confirmed that many valleys had never before been entered by humans. The expedition had to rely on satellite mapping and GPS to navigate, as the valley's walls are so vertical and hundreds of meters high. Even with modern equipment, progress was slow, and some valleys are so narrow, sunlight doesn't even reach the floor. Subsequent expeditions in 2010 and 2017 explored additional sections, but large portions of it are still unvisited. Each one of the separate valleys kind of functions almost like an ecological island with its own little climate and isolated populations, and scientists believe that this fragmentation may explain why the McKay has such high levels of endemism, even compared to the rest of Madagascar. The only practical way to reach the massif is by 4x4 from a nearby town, followed by multi-day treks through dry riverbeds and across ridges. Once inside, there's no trails or reliable sources of fresh water, and GPS reception can be lost in the narrowest canyons. Today, parts of the McKay are protected under Madagascar's national park system, but full exploration would take decades. Number 8. The Zanscar Valley side canyons of India. Within the Indian Himalayas, the Zanscar Valley in Ladakh is known for its beauty and its isolation. While the main valley and its small settlements are visited by trekkers and pilgrims, many of the numerous side canyons branch out from the Zanscar River are still largely unexplored. Many of these gorges were cut by glaciers over thousands of years, and they're so narrow and steep they can only be entered during brief summer months or in winter when the river freezes. Satellite images show dozens of tributary ravines that wind into uninhabited mountains, but few have been mapped or even explored. Expeditions have attempted to reach some of the tributaries, but frequent rockfalls, ice, and sudden floods makes it pretty hazardous. The region's remoteness is also reinforced by its extreme climate. In winter, temperatures here can fall below -30 degrees Celsius, which cuts off all travel routes. In summer, melting snow creates flash floods that will erase a trail and reshape the canyon walls, and even the main Zanscar River Road, built in recent years, can't penetrate most of the side valleys. Because of these geological barriers, scientific exploration has been pretty minimal. The Indian Geological Survey maps identify some of these tributaries as only unmapped drainage, which shows that even basic measurements are missing. Despite its beautiful appearance from satellites, the inner network of Zanscar's side valleys are one of the least understood environments in the Himalayas. Yeah, they're physically real, but seldom entered, and almost completely undocumented at ground level. Number 7. The Mount Bosavi Crater and Inner Valleys, Papua New Guinea. Mount Bosavi, this is an extinct volcano in Papua New Guinea's southern highlands, contains one of the most remarkable features on the planet, a massive collapsed volcanic crater more than 1 kilometer deep and 4 kilometers wide. Within this crater and the surrounding valleys is an ecosystem so isolated that it remained unknown to science until a BBC-led expedition in 2009 brought it to attention. The team that entered the Bosavi crater found more than 40 previously undescribed species, including fish, frogs, insects, and a giant woolly rat. Yet even this landmark exploration covered only a small portion of the area. The crater's steep interior walls and thick vegetation made their movement extremely difficult. Satellite imagery shows numerous ravines that branch off from the main crater, and many of which have no trails or any visible clearing. The climate inside the crater is humid and perpetually misty, and because of its enclosed topography, it just traps the moisture and heat, which creates a microclimate that's distinct from the surrounding highlands. Local Kasua and Daribi communities live around the outer slopes, but they rarely enter the crater itself. It is considered dangerous and sacred. Helicopters can only land on limited flat areas near the rim, and descending the inner walls requires technical climbing, and even advanced drones struggle with the constant cloud cover and the thick canopy. Since 2009, no comprehensive follow-up surveys have mapped the entire Bosavi Valley system, and most of its tributaries are unvisited. The inner crater and its hidden side valleys are a living reminder that even in the age of satellite mapping, huge stretches of our planet's surface have still never been explored on foot. Number 6. The Cyan Mountains Valleys, Russia. Stretching the border of southern Siberia and northern Mongolia, the Cyan Mountains form one of Asia's most remote systems. Their interior valleys, particularly those in the eastern and western Cyan ranges, are largely unexplored even by Russian scientists. The region is marked by huge forests, deep glaciers, and complex drainage networks that feed into Siberia's great rivers, including the Yenisei. Human presence in these valleys is minimal. Only scattered reindeer herders and hunters form small indigenous groups like the Tofa and that inhabit the outer fringes. And beyond these settlements, the terrain becomes almost impassable. Access roads disappear, they're replaced by cliffs, dense taiga, and rivers that surge with meltwater from snowfields and glaciers. Satellite imagery shows long linear valleys that cut deep into the range, many with no signs of trails, bridges, or any past habitation. The Russian Academy of Sciences has conducted sporadic research on the mountain's geology here, but most studies focus on peripheral areas. The interior valleys, especially those near the Oka Plateau, are practically blank zones on detailed topographic maps. Frequent snow cover, poor visibility, and lack of infrastructure has made the aerial surveys inconsistent. Scientists do believe many of the valleys may host endemic species or plants and small mammals that are adapted to microclimates trapped between these high ridges. However, direct confirmation remains limited due to the absence of long-term field work. Harsh winters with temps plunging below -40 degrees Celsius and seasonal flooding are further deterring exploration. Expeditions require full self-sufficiency and often rely on rivers for access. The result is that huge areas of the Cyan valleys, real, measurable places, have never been surveyed in person, remaining one of Eurasia's great unexplored wildernesses. Number 5. The Sua Saba valleys in eastern Nepal. Way up there in far eastern Nepal, near the border with Tibet, the Sua Saba district is home to some of the most isolated valleys in the Himalayas. The region is defined by the Arun River and its tributaries, which carve gorges between peaks exceeding 6,000 meters. And while mountaineers pass through parts of the district to reach the Makalu base camp, most of the surrounding side valleys have never been properly explored. Many valleys here are uninhabited, their entrances reachable only after days of hiking from the nearest village, and satellite data shows entire sub-valleys with no recorded footpaths or habitation, even though they lie within one of Nepal's biologically richest zones. Limited surveys by Nepal's Department of National Parks and Wildlife Conservation have recorded rare species like red pandas, snow leopards, and black bears in the accessible valleys. Yet the more remote basins, those draining into the upper Sangpo and Sua rivers, remain almost completely unstudied. Frequent landslides and heavy monsoon rains destroy the trails annually and just erases any evidence of previous expeditions. No roads connect the deep interior valleys to major towns, and supplies have to be carried on foot or by pack animals, and because of this, the local communities occupy only scattered settlements near the lower Arum River, leaving the upper valleys untouched. Climatologists have identified these unexplored gorges as critical for understanding Himalayan water systems, but field access remains impossible for much of the year. Between the logistics obstacles and natural hazards, large parts are among the least explored in the Himalayas. This is a region where real valleys exist, but remain entirely unknown to science and mapping teams. Number 4. The Kakar Valleys, China. In the extreme west of China's Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, where the Pamir Mountains meet the western edges of the Kunlun Range, are the Kakar Valleys, a desolate series of gorges and basins that remain almost entirely unexplored. This region is part of the so-called Roof of the World, a tangle of uplifted ridges and glaciated summits that border Tajikistan and Afghanistan. Even by the standards of Central Asia's landscapes, the Kakar area stands apart for its remoteness. Reaching 6,000 meters in elevation, their walls are sharp and unstable, formed by continuous freeze-thaw cycles, and many are filled with debris from recurring landslides. These harsh conditions, the thin air, the year-round cold, and the total absence of infrastructure, have ensured that few, if any, outsiders have ever descended into the depths. Historically, this area was a blank spot. Not even the most detailed Soviet and Chinese military maps. In the mid-20th century, geologists from both nations made brief helicopter reconnaissance flights along the main ridges of the plateau, but strong winds, altitude, and political restrictions prevented them from venturing deeper. These limited images show huge ice-filled troughs and moraine-choked basins, but couldn't reveal any details like vegetation, sediment composition, or potential water flow beneath the seasonal snow. Even scientific missions require multiple layers of government approval here, which is rarely granted, and as a result, data about the area comes almost exclusively from satellite sensing. These images reveal a mosaic of sharp ridges and U-shaped valleys that appear to connect a chain of hidden lakes. Some are fringed by patches of vegetation, maybe cold-tolerant alpine grasses, but there's no evidence of any trails, animal tracks, or temporary encampments. The few local people who live in this part are semi-nomadic herders who move livestock along the periphery during the brief summer seasons. They don't enter the deep Kakar Valley themselves, both because of their danger and because the terrain offers no grazing land. Local oral histories, though, describe the upper mountains as lands of ice and wind, where storms can form suddenly and last for days. The Kakar valleys are real measurable places. They're visible on Earth observation imagery, but unreachable by humans. Their isolation is natural and political. It's shaped by mountain, ice, and the strict boundaries of modern nations. They remain one of Earth's last truly unvisited corners, where the silence of stone and snow has likely endured for millennia without a single recorded human footprint. Number 3. The Kerguelen Island valleys of southern Indian Ocean. More than 3,300 kilometers from the nearest inhabited continent, surrounded by the frigid waters of the southern Indian Ocean, the Kerguelen Islands represent one of the most inaccessible places on Earth. The main island covers roughly 7,200 square kilometers, and that's an expanse of basalt plateaus, glaciers, and fjord-like valleys carved by ice during the last glacial period. Kerguelen is a French territory. It's often called the Island of Desolation, a name given by early explorers who saw only black rock, cold wind, and relentless surf. This environment here is polar in character. Temperatures hover between -1 Celsius and 7 degrees Celsius year-round, rainfall is constant, and the wind seldom drops below gale force. There's no permanent civilian residence. The only human presence is at a small scientific base on the eastern coast that has around 50 to 100 researchers at any one time. Beyond that outpost, though, the island's interior remains effectively untraveled. The valleys run between glaciated ridges and extinct volcanic cones and descend toward coastal fjords that are filled with icebergs. Other valleys, those deep in the south and west around the Cook Glacier, have never been reached by foot. The French Polar Institute's topographic surveys mark several of them as non-observed terrain, meaning they exist only as contours derived from aerial radar. Ecologically, the Kerguelen Valley supports some hardy species that are adapted to this isolation and cold. Mosses, lichens, and cushion plants dominate the ground cover, while seabirds and penguins nest in the lower reaches. Inland, away from the station, there's no mammals except for the introduced reindeer population brought by French sailors in the 1950s. Scientists who have visited nearby basins report that travel here is grueling. Storms can strike suddenly, visibility can drop to zero, and GPS reception is often lost amid the thick clouds. The result is that most of the valleys here remain unseen by human eyes. Even scientific teams focusing on geology or climate research have confined their work to accessible zones. The interior, especially the central and southwestern valleys between Mount Ross and the Galiani Mountains, have never been explored on foot. In the modern world, few places are so completely real yet so completely unknown. Lonely corridors of wind and ice, standing at the farthest edge of the inhabited planet. Number 2. Nyangolo Valley System in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Hidden in the northeastern highlands of the DRC, near the frontier with South Sudan and Uganda, this valley system is one of the least known regions on the African continent. While much of Central Africa's rainforest have been mapped and surveyed by satellite, this corridor is strikingly underdocumented. Despite being located in one of the most biodiverse regions of Africa, almost no direct scientific fieldwork has ever taken place here. The Nyangolo Valley is part of a broader drainage basin that feeds the Ulea River, a tributary of the Congo. It descends from the high ridges that rise to around 2,000 meters before flattening into forested floodplains. From above, the valley appears as a maze of winding channels and dense vegetation with no signs of human settlement. The closest tracks end more than 100 kilometers away, and reaching the valley would require weeks of travel on foot through some of the most difficult rainforest terrain on Earth. People who live within that several days' distance are agricultural and pastoral communities of Lendu and Hima peoples who occupy the plateau fringes rather than the inner valleys. Oral accounts from some local guides describe the lowlands as impassable swamp forest filled with dangerous wildlife and deep mud. No reliable data exists on plants or animals, and no formal mapping expeditions are recorded in academic literature. Even aerial reconnaissance has been minimal. Persistent clouds, combined with conflict in the eastern Congo since the 1990s, has left the area poorly photographed and rarely flown over. Yet scientists have long suspected that valleys like Nyangolo may shelter undiscovered species. Given the isolated geography and the microclimates here, biologists believe it could contain species that diverged from their relatives thousands of years ago, and they're surviving in hidden pockets of rainforest cut off by elevation and river systems. Satellite data from the European Space Agency's Sentinel-2 program has revealed patches of lighter vegetation color that could correspond to marsh clearings or small inland lakes, but these have never been confirmed by ground survey. If scientific expeditions were ever mounted, they would require coordination with local communities and aerial logistics similar to those used in the Amazon basin. For now, though, the Nyangolo Valley remains a void in modern geography, an enormous, tangible landscape on the map of Africa that exists without human footprints or even first-hand descriptions. Number 1. The Yarlong Sangpo Inner Bend, the Namcha Barwa region of Tibet. At the eastern edge of the Himalayas, where the Tibetan Plateau drops into the jungles of India, is the Yarlong Sangpo's Inner Bend, a deep-cut section of canyon so inaccessible that it's been described by geographers as the last great geographic mystery on Earth. The Sangpo River, which originates near Mount Kailash, travels across Tibet before plunging into this bend near the peak of Namcha Barwa at 7,782 meters, creating what is arguably the deepest valley in the world. While the gorge has been partially explored, the innermost bend, where the river disappears into a series of narrow chasms between the cliffs, is virtually unvisited by anyone. The gorge twists through nearly impassable slopes of granite and schist that form a loop around the mountain before continuing towards India. Landslides, earthquakes, and extreme rain continually reshape the land here, closing even temporary trails. Despite numerous expeditions over the last century, no one has followed the full river path through the inner bend on foot. Early attempts in the late 19th century by British surveyors ended in failure due to floods and cliffs, and later Chinese mapping expeditions in the 1980s and 90s succeeded only partially with overflights and remote sensing. The last recorded expedition to approach the central gorge was a joint Chinese-American rafting team in 2002, which descended part of the upper Sangpo but was forced to withdraw before entering the inner bend due to impassable rapids and unstable terrain. Now, this inaccessibility stems not only from the geography, but from governance. The area lies within a restricted border region of Tibet, close to India's Arunachal Pradesh, and access is tightly controlled by Chinese authorities. Only limited scientific teams under special permits have even been allowed to enter the outer valleys. Beyond those points, exploration would require technical climbing, whitewater navigation, and months of supply transport in terrain where rescue is impossible. From orbit, the gorge looks like a dark gash that coils through the mountains, half hidden under the clouds, and every year landslides alters the contours slightly. Glacial melt feeds torrents that roar unseen below the mist, and even in the 21st century with satellites, drones, and digital mapping, the inner bend of the Yarlong Sangpo is largely unknown to human eyes. For centuries, it's been whispered about by explorers and scientists as the ultimate frontier. This is a valley where geography, geology, and climate combine to form one of the Earth's last truly unexplored lands.